Hey there. Welcome to The Climate Cycle, a podcast focused on Canada's climate tech ecosystem. In each episode, we sit down with founders building climate solutions right here in Canada to better understand the challenges presented by climate change and what we can do about it. Today, we have a special episode coming to you live from Carbon Removal Day in Ottawa. Hosted by the policy group Carbon Removal Canada, the event pulls together climate experts, startup founders, researchers, and policymakers to explore how we can scale carbon removal and build out the industry here in Canada. I caught up with a few folks that are working across the life cycle of carbon removal to better understand the current state of the carbon removal market, what changes are needed to unlock more demand from buyers, and the impact that a shifting political landscape could have on the space. First up, we sat down with Phil DeLuna. Phil is the Chief Science and Commercial Officer at Deep Sky, a carbon removal project development company. Phil, can you introduce yourself and what Deep Sky does in carbon removal?
So my name is Phil DeLuna. I'm the Chief Science and Commercial Officer of Deep Sky. We are a Canadian-based technology agnostic project developer and owner-operator of carbon removal projects. We serve a gap in the market, which is we help to build projects, not necessarily technologies. And if we look at other clean technology verticals like solar or wind, as those industries matured, there was a natural segmentation as well. GE and Siemens build wind turbines, but Ørsted builds wind projects, right? Panasonic builds solar cells, but it's the utility in your backyard that builds the solar project. Why should that be any different in carbon removal? And we actually felt that a lot of these technology companies needed a place to deploy and needed more project developers to help them get to scale.
Cool. That's a really good analogy. It really puts it in context. We're here at Carbon Removal Day here in Ottawa. A lot of the technology companies that you're working with are actually coming from outside of Canada. I'd love to hear your perspective on what about Canada is helping attract these partners.
Canada has the potential to be the lowest cost jurisdiction for carbon removal in the world, bar none. One, we have incredible resources in the sense of renewable energy capacity. Some provinces like Manitoba, Quebec, British Columbia have 99% hydroelectricity. And so you can get baseload firm power to do direct air capture right away. Second, we have some of the best geologic storage potential in the world. Not only is it well known and characterized, but it's de-risked because carbon capture and storage has been done in Canada and in many of these reservoirs for decades. And then third, we have really good policies like the Carbon Capture, Utilization and Storage Investment Tax Credit, a 60% reduction on all CapEx for a direct air capture project, which is massive in terms of getting that cost down and making that a financially viable project. And then finally, talent. The Canadian industry, especially the oil and gas industry, it has all of the ingredients that we need to scale the carbon removal industry, which is basically oil and gas in reverse, right? We still need pipe fitters and welders and mechanical engineers, people who know how to move fluids and solids and heat around. Those same skills and people will be used here in carbon removal.
Perfect. I love that. There's so many natural advantages that we have for this particular industry. So on a panel today, you were talking about growing the project pipeline and growing a number of buyers in this industry. How do you think about moving from those first movers and generating momentum?
So in order to grow the market for the voluntary carbon market, which are primarily Fortune 500 companies, private corporations that have large scope 3 emissions that are difficult or impossible to abate, they're really price sensitive. Sustainability and a lot of these carbon removal and net zero activities have a hard time justifying those budgets. And so the fastest way that we can grow the market is to lower the cost. But the only way to lower cost is to deploy more and more. That's how solar got cheap and wind and batteries. It wasn't time, it was a number of deployments where we learned that got the learning rate down. And one big issue of getting these sort of first movers to expand even further is that there's so many delays from when a carbon credit deal has been announced to when these deliveries are actually occurring. There have been so many, if you go on, for example, CDR.FYI, and then look up the number of deals, which is a sort of third-party dashboard, an organization that tracks these deals, the number of deals that have been announced versus the number of credits that have been issued, there's a massive gap because these tech-based projects take a lot of time, effort, permitting, and it might be 2-3 years from when that initial deal was announced before a slow trickling of credits actually get produced. And that's the biggest gap as well, which is we've seen a lot of hype in the space. A lot of companies announce credit sales. Now it's time to show, right? Now it's time to deliver.
Seeing those deliveries makes a lot of sense and would help kind of build the confidence in the buy side. I'd love to understand, so from your perspective as a project developer, how do you think about building the capital stack? You have kind of the technology and de-risking it, but also putting these things out in the field.
Yeah, I mean, first of a kind capital is always difficult. And you always have to think about how can you de-risk this project as much as possible in order to attract the capital. Now, there are things like strategic investors on the project co, and these could be companies that want to either participate in the supply chain of carbon removal. I'm thinking of large industrial conglomerates that potentially could supply equipment and core equipment into projects. And so there's a natural fit for why they would want to invest into a project. Or it could be large funds that have long-term views, pension funds, government funds. In Canada, we have, for example, the Canada Infrastructure Bank, the Canada Growth Fund, these sorts of concessionary debt capital or different capital stacks that have very low cost in terms of the cost of capital, but could help fill that gap in the short term. The reality is we need to be creative in finding as many sources of capital as possible. And the best way to do that is to secure as much offtake to backstop any investment.
Perfect. Maybe the last question will very quickly. What's the biggest thing you're excited for in Canada's carbon removal this year?
There's so many things to be excited for. I can't probably pick just one thing. I mean, selfishly, I'm really excited for our project to come online. It'll be the first in Canada to deliver a carbon credit, and it might even be the first in North America if we beat 1.5 in Carbon Engineering's project in Texas, which fingers crossed looks like we're going to. But in general, just the excitement. I mean, from the government perspective, the direct air capture protocol, which is a world first government-backed protocol being launched and being finalized this year, the carbon procurement program, which again is leading in terms of international policy. These are all needed and necessary to start bringing more confidence to the market. And I'm so excited that Canada is the place that it's happening.
Perfect. Phil, thanks for taking some time with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Next up, we spoke with Carson Fong, a program manager at the Business Renewables Centre Canada and the Pembina Institute's Carbon Dioxide Removal Centre. We talk about developing a market for carbon removal and what tools and tactics we can borrow from the clean energy space. What are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing in growing the carbon removal industry and getting some of those buyers on board?
Yeah, as far as the buyers go, CDRs are still a relatively new topic for a lot of folks. We see that sustainability offices, they're spread thin across so many different files. And so to be able to prioritize learning about a new industry and opportunities for them is difficult. And so what we're trying to do is provide resources and education to build their awareness and that interest in what will be a very pivotal part of their net zero goals. There's a recognition that this is something they need in the future, but really the message we're trying to get across is that they need to be involved today to start building that capacity and securing that supply for their future goals.
And so today we heard about the new government procurement program. I'm curious to get your thoughts on what impact that is going to have on the sector.
Yeah, it's a great early step. What we learned a lot in a buyer scan we did last year, we reached out to over 200 Canadian companies and assessed their interest and knowledge level and ability to purchase CDR. And what we learned was the majority of our respondents would be more likely to purchase CDR if they saw a government move forward with a purchase. And so we're really excited that the government of Canada has announced this purchase and is moving forward. We think it has the potential to catalyze and bring a lot of other companies on board who might not have the capacity to do their own due diligence and their own research. Having that brand name big buyer is important for the other buyers to see.
That makes a lot of sense. And then, so I've seen you've done a lot of research on the interaction between carbon removal and clean energy and other industries. Could you speak a little bit about that interplay and what are some of the opportunities that you folks have kind of scoped out there?
Yeah, for sure. Particularly for direct air capture, it's very energy intensive, and the quality of the product that's the removal of atmospheric CO2 entirely hinges on the carbon intensity of the energy that is used in that process, because that gets subtracted out and you're selling the net removal of carbon removal based on whatever happens within the process. And so it's critical for direct air capture to have access to renewable energy. And so a big part of enabling direct air capture in Canada is to enable the procurement of renewable energy. These companies need to be able to buy zero carbon electricity because that increases the effectiveness and the value of carbon removal that they can provide.
And then are there lessons or tools that you've seen deployed in the clean energy space that you think might be useful for use in carbon removal, whether it's some of the standards or even like financing mechanisms?
Yeah, for sure. And we see this a lot with power purchase agreements with renewable electricity in Alberta. These market mechanisms, they've been able to provide developers access to financing because this provides the developer with a long-term, reliable source of revenue from a credit-worthy buyer. And they can then take that to the bank, and the bank recognizes that as guaranteed future revenue, which allows them to finance a project. And so we're seeing a lot of similar mechanisms happening in CDR, and we want to help support more of those advanced market commitments that can show large-scale buyers guaranteeing the purchase of future credits and then using those contracts to then help the developers gain financing.
Cool. Yeah, I think there's a lot to kind of learn there from the other industries. Maybe you can speak a little bit about the economic opportunity for Canada specifically when it comes to carbon removal.
For sure, it's tremendous. And I'd probably highlight that it looks a little different across the country. I think each area of Canada has its own set of natural and economic advantages. And there's a different type of CDR that can best fit for each geographic region. And so, for example, the prairies, Alberta, Saskatchewan, they've got great access to geologic sequestration, great access to wind and solar. And so that makes DACs a good fit there. We see a lot of activity in the Atlantic provinces with ocean-based methods and river-based methods. And so that's an opportunity for them. It's a great opportunity for some of the existing workforces, skilled trades in certain sectors to transfer over into and build a bridge towards a new net zero economy. I think it's a great new industry that can help Canada through the energy transition.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's a huge opportunity. Anything that we didn't cover that you think we should touch on or you wanted to share?
I can share. So we've got an event coming up in Calgary, April 30th. It's called Carbon Catalyst. And what we're trying to do is bring together interested buyers or newcomers to CDR to learn more and talk directly with developers in an intimate setting. So any interested folks, happy to chat and tell them more about the event.
To dive deeper into the market development of carbon removal, I sat down with Jane Kearns, partner at Evok Innovations. I wanted to get Jane's perspective on what needs to happen for this market to really take off, what she looks for when evaluating new tech, and how startups in this space should be thinking about capital and financing. Okay, so maybe you could start off just introducing yourself and a little bit about Evok Innovations.
I'm Jane Kearns. I'm a partner at Evok Innovations. We're a venture capital fund based in Vancouver. We invest across North America. We're a Series A stage investor, so that essentially means that we like to invest where there's no more sort of science risk. We're happy to take technical scale-up risk. So that's where we like to play. We don't do any software. We focus on essentially deep decarbonization of heavy industry. So we're really interested in critical minerals. So how do we get the metals we need for the energy transition without destroying the planet? Clean fuels are a real interest, and then carbon management, which is why I'm at the Carbon Removal Canada event.
There's lots of talk about growing the industry, and Evok's at a very interesting intersection, Series A, hard tech, deep tech. Could you share your perspective as an investor on kind of how you've seen CDR evolve over the past few years and kind of how that's shifted on your radar?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting time in the carbon markets. I think that there's broad acknowledgement that we need CDR ultimately to hit our climate targets. There's so much turbulence right now with what's happening south of us in the US, where apparently climate change is no longer an issue. The problem is the climate doesn't care what politics say. So we do still have a massive climate issue, and we need to address it if we want to have, life on Earth, maybe not life on Earth, but human life on Earth in the future. So we at Evok believe that we still need to address this. I think the carbon markets will continue to exist. The question that we're grappling with right now is what happens with timelines and whether or not those are going to be massively stretched. And is the turbulence politically in the US and in Canada going to mean that we have fewer buyers stepping up? As an investor, what we really need to see is a buyer out the other side. So we've got lots of technologies now that are at fully capable of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere in very novel and interesting ways. What we don't have is the buyers stepping up on the other side to actually buy those removals. And so I would say that's where we see the most risk right now. But the reality is we still need those removals. So that market will come to fruition. It's just a matter of when.
So Evok has a few CDR companies in its portfolio. What are some of the signals that you look for or that matter most when you're evaluating CDR companies?
So the key thing is cost. So we need to know that they can ultimately scale massively, so they're able to remove a gigaton of carbon from the atmosphere, and that they're able to do it under $100 a ton. And so when we're evaluating these companies, we're really looking for how can they bring their costs down. So in things like DAC, where it's usually an electrically driven process, it's really hard to imagine in a lot of cases how they get their costs down to where they need to be because you need so many green electrons. So we're looking for processes that use less electricity, or in some cases no electricity, and technologically relatively simple, because that means that it's a lot easier to deploy them at scale. It's part of the reason we like planetary is because it's really an elegant solution, and they're ultimately using the oceans to draw carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere using a natural process that happens already. And because the oceans have such a massive capacity to hold carbon dioxide, they're doing it already. They already hold over 90% of the world's carbon dioxide that we've emitted. And so it creates this just impressive, important, massive opportunity to actually draw carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere.
Yeah, I think I heard Mike describe it as tanks on tarps is kind of as complex as the technology gets, which is a good place to be. I guess one of the last questions I wanted to ask was, how should CDR founders be thinking about their capital stack? There's an element of technology development and de-risking, but there's also project financing. Any words of advice or things that founders should be looking for when they're thinking about the capital stack?
Yeah, the short version is that equity is expensive. So they're going to need equity, at first, likely from venture capital as a way to kickstart things. Non-dilutive capital in the form of grants is really important. It's part of the reason why Canada's had such a great clean tech, climate tech ecosystem is because we've had a really great granting network that allows these companies to get rid of the science risk. And then once they've proven their technology, you're exactly right, then project capital starts to become really important. So then you need to have a really smart CFO who understands project finance and knows how to stack capital together in the most cost-efficient way. Honestly, it's not something that any CDR companies have had to do yet because they haven't had to scale. But we have a bunch of companies in Canada that are getting to the point where that's going to start to become a reality. Planetary is one of them. Carbon Run is another. These are technologies that are ready to be deployed. And so that project capital is going to start to become very important.
Perfect. That's a really exciting place to be. Thanks so much for sitting down and spending some time. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Justin.
For a technology perspective, I caught up with Genny Shaw, co-founder of carbon removal startup Gaia Refinery. I wanted to get Jenny's take on the current state of the market, how they're balancing that tension between high certainty while still moving quickly, and how they're building partnerships with industry to create traction. Genny, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what Gaia Refinery does?
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Justin. I am Genny Shaw, the co-founder and CEO of Gaia Refinery, and we are developing a CDR technology that is unique. We call it a bioDAC technology. And so essentially it's a dual action carbon removal and waste to value solution. It's about 4 steps. And what's included in there is direct air capture through capture panels, liquid DAC capture panels. And it's driven by a biomass carbon removal. So we use biogenic acid to not only drive the second half of DAC, but then we move that through innovative fuel cell to extract actually a biogenic part of carbon dioxide as well. And in doing this, the last benefit and the waste to value is that we can create the sodium hydroxide that we use in our DAC panels. It's getting a little scientific, but I'll stop it at that. And we can use industrial waste, high acidic waste water streams and various excess waste streams in different industries. All that being said, is we're really this a modular technology that can remove carbon while solving some pain points of bioindustrial partners. And so we're very much looking to partner in the bioindustrial space and provide them with definitely carbon removal solution for decarbonization, but it's also hopefully solving some of their challenges and pain points around waste management. And it feeds into the market urgency to be a sustainable, forward-looking company.
Very cool. Okay. So we just came off of Carbon Removal Day. I'd love to maybe hear from you. What have been some of the biggest challenges in scaling up Gaia Refinery? You've been in it for a couple of years now. What are some of the big challenges that kind of come up for you?
I don't think it's anything new, but how we see it, first and foremost, is getting back into the hard tech investment and scaling of a solution that needs to be physical and present. And so the challenge there is the cost of it and the natural engineering that's needed to de-risk it. I bring that up because it feeds into the other challenges is time. And so when you're developing novel technologies, what everybody wants is this like robust de-risking and evaluation to move up through the TRL levels. Sometimes it's kind of misunderstood maybe, or not enough knowledge is given to the fact that it just takes time. Even if you go super fast, even if everything works on the timelines to get through those de-risking steps takes time. And I think it's pretty cool that we're in this because it's novel. Like literally most of them are new inventions. So we need to take these protocols, but we need it fast. And I think the third thing that we see and is talked about a lot is an unstable political environment or a changing one. Sometimes this doesn't touch on the tech development, but it does slow down the investment cycles. And so if you're talking about time and focus on pitching investors for money, it's very intertwined, these hard tech time and political environment. And a lot of CDR companies are mimicking that political risk or economic risk is how an investor would see it with the technology risk. And so I think us, but Gaia Refinery, but carbon removal in general, we're all navigating those three things.
No, and I think that was such a big theme throughout the day. We heard from folks at the Biden administration talking about the huge changes that have happened in the US since. We also had, the announcement about Canada's carbon removal procurement program moving forward. So great to be in a space where there's a little bit more political uncertainty, but I guess globally it's definitely is shifting. A theme that came up a lot during the day, and you touched on this a bit, is this tension between we want a high level of trust, we want certainty, but we need to be moving quickly. Curious how you think about that as a company, de-risking your technology and in those conversations maybe with investors or buyers.
Definitely. I think we get quite creative on the speed front and bootstrapping is a word, and not just for funding that's coming in, but to keep pushing ahead, to keep pushing the tech ahead for the speed part and certainty. For Gaia Refinery, we have a niche. And so I don't know if this directly answers your question, but it's kind of our opportunity. And in looking at that certainty and speed, the bioindustrial legacy industries that we've identified as some of our key market verticals, we can partner with them. And therefore, the certainty right now, the compliance market is a lot more certain than the voluntary carbon market. And these are big industrial plants or facilities that need to do all the things related to carbon removal, decarbonization, but carbon removal can play a piece in there and they're set up. So the certainty of like being able to have a technology that fits in to the compliance and the voluntary, we feel like has made us a little bit more certain, especially on that economic front. And as far as the technology, I think we're in the same boat as everybody else, is getting to pilot as fast as we can, which means pausing to raise money and doing the due diligence on MRV and all the different buckets that go along with the validation and de-risking. That's kind of how we're approaching it.
Yeah, it seems like the fact that you have these industry partnerships seems really interesting. I'd love to maybe understand a little bit more. For those industry partners, what are some of the big things that they're looking for when you're approaching them? And then What are the keys to those partnerships from your perspective?
Yeah, so we've, in the classic customer analysis, key bioindustrial partners need to do industrial decarbonization, that they're all facing that. They're also facing upfront costs and capital constraints to like the different options. In ours in particular, they have waste management needs. They have to make sure that their wastewater is a certain level or that they're utilizing the resources coming in, the bioresources. And then there's an urgency, which is a market urgency. Corporations are getting sustainability commitment pressure, which moves down to their whole value chain, where customers are requiring, some of the industries to take action and be corporately sustainable, and regulatory pressure on all fronts: waste management, sustainability, industrial decarbonization. So to answer your question, if these are the challenges in what we're looking for, what Gaia Refinery can do is come in and we're developing this technology that is a plug and play. So it's not even a retrofit. It does carbon removal, and it does it by checking all these boxes. So we can take waste streams and drive direct air capture that they can directly choose to put against the compliance market or their decarbonization targets. For us, because we're often working with product companies that develop a product for the low carbon fuel standards, they can seek benefits through credit gains on low carbon fuel standards. And the market urgency, it really shows their customers and their shareholders that they're approaching net zero seriously. The last piece that's not really talking to those pain points, but is a benefit, is it's going to be a low cost modular system. So it will be manufactured and assembled and then kind of arrive at a low cost, and it's not overly disruptive. And so that's kind of our vision and hope for moving through how we can hit the industry's pain points.
Very cool. So it seems like you've really kind of woven it in as opposed to maybe like a tack on to the side of what a business is doing. So you mentioned the modular aspect of it. I'd love to hear how you've been approaching the capital stack for Gaia. You have kind of the technology development and then also probably some project development and project financing. What does that look like for you?
Great question. In the current stage that we are at, it's very much the classic startup capital stack, some private funds early on, some grants, and then we're entering the VC arena for equity investment. What I want to spend the most time talking about, though, is the environment in Canada, is the support from accelerators that you get early on and the federal and provincial governments through grants. The grant and matching programs in Canada, 3-to-1, 4-to-1, different competitions or industry pushes. The forestry industry has a call out that they'll support some innovation in one area. I will say it kind of circles back to a challenge of all startups is the time it takes to apply for that is time away from building. And so that's part of it. Looking forward, we're looking at project financing and understanding where that might go, but with a modular approach that we hope to sell to industrial customers. It may look a little different. It might be more debt and manufacture and assemble if we can get there. I'm sure the first pilot and that will have some elements of project financing. We're just trying to figure that out and learn the best way forward for right now.
Yeah, and kind of tailoring that to your circumstances and the technology and all of that. So coming out of Carbon Removal Day, there was a lot of discussion about what can be done to grow the industry. From your perspective, what are some of the things you're maybe most excited about or would really like to see in terms of accelerating carbon removal as an industry and from that market development perspective?
I think what's most exciting for us, but also what will unlock both the demand and supply side the most, is I really think it's policy or regulations, full stop. And some of the thinking there is that the market dynamics have been tried. The voluntary carbon market is growing and is robust. But CO2 is invisible. It's like this non tangible good for everybody. We know the science. We can show that there's too much CO2 in the environment. It's not great and that we need to reverse this. But changing human behavior just for that single fact has been difficult. And the pure market force or economics of a new tradable market or voluntary carbon market is growing, but it's still not the push I think everybody needs. And we've seen this for some time. One of the first things that pushed us into taking a look if we could fit into the compliance market, or always advocating that there has to be some way that the voluntary and compliance markets can come into play. We're seeing it. The SBTI targets, at first it was carbon removal should only be 10%. And then it's just that narrative of what percent, how. Let's not stop it at a certain point, but have guardrails. Like, there's a lot of good arguments for guardrails to not do CDR in lieu of decarbonization. That has to be continued to say right from the get-go. So I just come back to policy and regulations where mandates will make suppliers that where there's need to supply, and therefore suppliers will step up into the game.
It's interesting, we're so far away from over investing in carbon removal, but that seems to be a big concern on people's mind. Perfect. Well, Genny, thanks so much for taking some time. It's really great to hear your perspective on this.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on the show.
That's a wrap on Carbon Removal Day. Shout out to the Carbon Removal Canada team for putting on a great event, and you can learn more about their work by visiting carbonremoval.ca. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave a rating and a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It would mean a lot and helps grow the show. To stay in the loop on Canadian climate tech news, recent fundraising, job postings, events, and more, subscribe to the Climate Tech Canada newsletter on our website. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.